Husband took his mistress to sign divorce papers, but the judge's verdict made him collapse in court. The aroma of rosemary chicken filled the Foster family dining room as Olivia carefully set the table for three. At 32, 7 months pregnant, she moved with the deliberate grace of someone who had learned to find comfort in routine. The baby kicked gently against her ribs as she adjusted the wine glasses, one filled with sparkling water for herself, two with the expensive Cabernet Daniel had been saving for special occasions. Daniel Foster, 37, loosened his tie as he walked through the front door of their suburban Chicago home. His dark hair was perfectly styled despite the October wind, and his charcoal suit still looked crisp after a full day at the architectural firm he'd built from the ground up. But tonight something was different in his posture, a tension that Olivia had been trying to ignore for months. "Smells incredible, Liv," he said, kissing her cheek with the mechanical affection of a man going through motions. "Sorry I'm late. Had to wrap up some things at the office." The office. Always the office these days. "No problem," Olivia replied, smoothing her navy maternity dress. "I made your favorite. Thought we could have a nice dinner together before." The doorbell rang. Daniel's face flickered with something Olivia couldn't quite read. "I'll get it," he said quickly, almost too quickly. When he returned, he wasn't alone. Camilla Rhodes walked into their dining room like she owned it, 26, with honey blonde hair cascading over her shoulders, and wearing a form-fitting burgundy dress that cost more than most people's rent. Her smile was bright, confident, and directed entirely at Daniel. "Olivia, you remember Camilla from the firm?" Daniel said, his voice carrying a forced casualness. "She's been working on the Morrison project with me. I invited her to join us for dinner to discuss some final details." Olivia's hand instinctively moved to her belly. She did remember Camilla, the new junior architect who had started 6 months ago, who always seemed to find reasons to work late when Daniel did, who laughed just a little too long at his jokes during company gatherings. "Of course," Olivia managed, her voice steady despite the alarm bells ringing in her head. "I'll set another place." As she moved to the kitchen, she heard Camilla's laugh, musical and carefree, followed by Daniel's responding chuckle. The sound of it made something cold settle in Olivia's chest. When she returned with the extra place setting, she found them standing closer than necessary, Camilla's hand briefly touching Daniel's arm as she spoke about blueprints and deadlines. They separated when they noticed Olivia, but not quickly enough. Dinner proceeded with stilted conversation about work, the weather, and carefully avoided topics. Camilla complimented the house, the food, even Olivia's pregnancy glow, all with the kind of synthetic sweetness that felt like poison disguised as honey. "So, Olivia," Camilla said, cutting into her chicken with surgical precision, "Daniel tells me you're due in January. How exciting. Have you thought about names?" "We're still deciding," Olivia replied, noting how Camilla said Daniel tells me with an intimacy that made her stomach turn. "I've always loved classic names," Camilla continued, her green eyes sparkling. "Nothing too trendy. Something timeless, you know? Like the kind of name that sounds good in a boardroom." The comment hung in the air like smoke. Olivia looked at Daniel, waiting for him to say something, anything, to redirect the conversation. Instead, he nodded approvingly at Camilla's words. "That's good thinking," he said. "Professional considerations are important." Something inside Olivia cracked. Here was this woman, barely older than a college graduate, sitting in their home, talking about naming their unborn child while Daniel nodded along like she had every right to an opinion. After dinner, as Olivia cleared the dishes, Daniel and Camilla had mysteriously disappeared to his home office to review the Morrison blueprints. She found herself standing at the kitchen sink, her hands trembling as she scrubbed the same plate for the 3rd time. The baby kicked again, harder this time as if sensing her distress. "I know," she whispered to her belly. "Something's not right." Through the kitchen window, she could see into the backyard where Daniel had built a swing set 3 years ago, when they'd first started trying for children. 2 years of heartbreak, 1 miscarriage, and now finally this miracle baby. And her husband was in his office with another woman discussing their future like Olivia was already a memory. When Camilla finally left at nearly 10 o'clock, Daniel walked her to her car. Olivia watched from the upstairs bedroom window as they stood talking beside Camilla's silver BMW for far longer than any business conversation required. Even from a distance, she could see the way Camilla leaned into him, the way his hand lingered on her car door, the way they looked at each other like they shared secrets. Daniel came to bed an hour later, smelling of Camilla's perfume. Sorry about that, he said, not meeting her eyes as he loosened his tie. The Morrison project is more complex than we thought. Might require some weekend work. Olivia lay on her side, her growing belly making sleep difficult even under the best circumstances. Tonight, it was impossible. Daniel, she said softly. Are we okay? The question hung between them in the darkness. For a moment she thought he might tell her the truth, whatever that truth was. Instead, he reached over and patted her shoulder with the same absent affection he'd give a loyal dog. Of course we're okay, Liv, just work stress, you know how it is. But she didn't know how it was, not anymore. As Daniel's breathing deepened into sleep, Olivia stared at the ceiling, her hand resting on her belly where their child grew. Something had shifted tonight. The life she'd built, the future she'd imagined, the man she'd trusted with everything. It all felt suddenly fragile, like a house of cards waiting for the slightest breeze to bring it crashing down. The baby kicked once more and Olivia made a silent promise. Whatever was coming, she would be ready for it. Outside, Chicago slept peacefully, unaware that in one suburban home, a woman's world was about to change forever. 3 weeks had passed since the dinner that changed everything, and Olivia Foster had become a detective in her own home. The pregnancy made her movements slower, more deliberate, but her mind had never been sharper. Every late meeting, every weekend emergency, every new shirt that smelled like expensive perfume, she cataloged it all with the precision of someone who could no longer afford to be naive. It was a Saturday morning in early November when the truth finally surfaced, brutal and undeniable. Daniel had left early for what he called a site inspection with the Morrison project team. Olivia, 8 months pregnant now and moving like a ship navigating careful waters, decided to tackle the home office. Their accountant needed tax documents, and Daniel had been too busy to organize them for weeks. The office smelled like him: coffee, expensive cologne, and something else that made her stomach turn. As she rifled through filing cabinets, looking for their joint investment statements, her fingers found something that didn't belong: a hotel receipt. The Fairmont, Chicago. October 15th, the night after their awkward dinner with Camilla. 2 guests, room service for champagne and strawberries. The total, $847. Olivia sank into Daniel's leather chair, the receipt trembling in her hands. October 15th. She remembered that night perfectly. Daniel had come home at 2 a.m., claiming the Morrison team had worked late into the evening and gone for drinks afterward. She'd been sick with morning sickness, worried about his safety, texting him every hour only to receive curt responses about meetings running over. The baby kicked hard against her ribs, as if responding to her racing heart. Her phone buzzed. A text from her sister Jenna. "How's the pregnancy treating you? Miss you." Olivia stared at the message, then at the receipt, then back at her phone. She needed to think clearly. She needed to be smart about this. Moving with purpose now, she photographed the receipt and began a systematic search of the office. In Daniel's jacket pocket, she found another piece of evidence: a business card for Renata's, an upscale Italian restaurant downtown, with a handwritten note on the back: table for 2, 7 p.m. Tuesday. Ask for the champagne table. See, Tuesday. Last Tuesday. The night Daniel claimed he was at a city planning committee meeting that ran until 10 p.m. The filing cabinet revealed more fragments of a double life: credit card statements showing charges at jewelry stores she'd never heard of, restaurants she'd never been to, a lingerie boutique that certainly wasn't buying anything for his pregnant wife. Her hands found the bottom drawer, locked. Daniel had always said it contained confidential client files. Olivia had respected that boundary for 7 years of marriage. Not anymore. The key was exactly where she thought it would be, taped under his desk drawer, because Daniel was nothing if not predictable. Inside the locked drawer, beneath a folder marked Morrison Architectural Plans, she found a manila envelope that contained her worst fears made tangible: photographs, dozens of them. Daniel and Camilla at restaurants, walking hand in hand through Lincoln Park, kissing in the parking garage of his office building. The photos weren't grainy surveillance shots. They were intimate, candid moments captured by someone who felt safe enough to document their affair openly. But it was the last photo that made Olivia's breath catch in her throat. Daniel and Camilla in what looked like a jewelry store, her left hand extended as he slipped a ring onto her finger. Not her ring finger, that would have been too obvious, but a promise ring, elegant and expensive, on her middle finger. Camilla's face was radiant with joy, and Daniel looked at her the way he used to look at Olivia years ago, before the miscarriage. before the fertility treatments, before she became just another problem to solve in his perfectly organized life. Under the photos was a printed email chain between Daniel and his lawyer, Garrett Westfield. The subject line read, "Divorce consultation, confidential." Olivia's vision blurred as she read Daniel's words. "Garrett, I need to understand my options. The pregnancy complicates things, but I can't continue living this lie. Camilla and I are serious about our future together. What's the cleanest way to handle this financially? I need to protect my business assets and ensure the divorce doesn't destroy what I've built. The baby changes things legally, I know, but Olivia hasn't worked in 3 years. Her contribution to the business has been minimal since 2021. Can we use that?" The response from his lawyer was clinical and cold. "Daniel, timing will be crucial. Filing during the pregnancy could be seen as abandonment, which won't play well with family court judges. However, if she's the one who initiates proceedings, it changes the narrative. We'd need to document any emotional instability on her part. Postpartum depression could be a factor. As for business assets, we'll need to review the partnership agreements. Let's schedule a meeting to discuss strategy." Olivia sat in the chair where her husband had planned her destruction, her hand pressed against her belly where their child grew, unaware that his father was already planning to discard them both. The garage door rumbled open. Daniel was home. Moving faster than she had in weeks, Olivia photographed the emails, returned everything exactly as she'd found it, and locked the drawer. By the time Daniel's key turned in the front door, she was in the kitchen, preparing lunch with hands that only trembled slightly. "Hey, babe," Daniel called out, his voice carrying false warmth. "How was your morning?" "Quiet," Olivia replied, not trusting herself to say more. "How was the site inspection?" "Productive, really productive." He appeared in the kitchen doorway, and Olivia noticed he was wearing a new shirt, one she'd never seen before. "The Morrison project is almost ready for final approval." The Morrison project, the lie that had become their marriage's epitaph. "That's wonderful," Olivia said, turning back to the stove so he couldn't see her face. "I'm sure Camilla is thrilled with how well it's going." There was a pause, just a fraction of a second too long, before Daniel answered. "Yeah, the whole team is excited. It's been a lot of work." As Olivia stirred the soup that would be their last shared meal in ignorance, she felt something shift inside her. The woman who had spent 3 weeks being afraid, being suspicious, being the victim of her own doubts, that woman was gone. In her place stood someone harder, smarter, and infinitely more dangerous than Daniel Foster had ever given her credit for. "Daniel," she said, still facing the stove. "Yeah, I love you." She heard him move closer, felt his hands on her shoulders. "I love you too, Liv. You and the baby. You're my whole world." The lies came so easily to him now, but Olivia had learned something important in the past 3 weeks. She was better at playing this game than he was. "I know," she whispered, and for the first time in months she smiled. The law office of Bennett and Associates sat quietly in downtown Chicago, its mahogany-paneled walls lined with legal volumes that spoke of decades of family court battles. Olivia Foster sat across from Theodore Bennett, a 60-year-old divorce attorney whose reputation for thoroughness had made him one of the most sought-after lawyers in the city. At 36 weeks pregnant, every movement was deliberate, but her mind was razor-sharp. 2 weeks had passed since her discovery in Daniel's office, and she had used every day to prepare for war. "Mrs. Foster?" Bennett said, adjusting his wire-rimmed glasses as he reviewed the folder she'd brought. "This is quite comprehensive. You've documented everything meticulously." Olivia had spent 14 days becoming someone she never thought she'd need to be. While Daniel believed she was nesting and preparing for the baby, she had been building a case that would change both their lives forever. "I learned from the best," she replied, thinking of Daniel's own obsessive attention to detail. "My husband taught me that preparation is everything." Bennett nodded, spreading the photographs across his desk. Daniel and Camilla at restaurants, walking through Lincoln Park, the jewelry store moment that had broken Olivia's heart. But these weren't the only evidence she'd gathered. "The financial documentation is particularly damaging," Bennett continued, reviewing bank statements Olivia had painstakingly copied. "These transfers to accounts associated with Miss Rhodes, the hotel receipts, the jewelry purchases. It establishes a clear pattern of marital asset dissipation." Olivia had discovered that Camilla's rent for her upscale apartment was being paid through a consulting fee from Daniel's firm, $3,200 a month for marketing services that existed only on paper. She'd found credit card charges for 2 plane tickets to Napa Valley over Labor Day weekend, when Daniel claimed he was at an architectural conference in Milwaukee. "What about his consultation with Garrett Westfield?" Olivia asked. "Ah, yes." Bennett's expression grew stern. "Mr. Westfield's advice about documenting your supposed emotional instability could be considered coaching your husband to commit fraud against the court. The emails where he suggests waiting for postpartum depression to file abandonment claims, that's ethically questionable at best." Olivia had printed every email, copied every document, and created a timeline that showed Daniel's affair had been ongoing for at least 8 months, starting before she'd even gotten pregnant. "There's something else," she said, reaching into her purse. "I hired a private investigator." Bennett raised an eyebrow. "Mrs. Foster, that's quite a step. My sister Jenna recommended him. She used him during her divorce 5 years ago." Olivia placed a manila envelope on the desk. "His name is Harrison Blake. He's been following them for a week." The photographs inside were devastating. Daniel and Camilla at the fertility clinic where Olivia had undergone her treatments, apparently getting pregnancy tests done. Camilla emerging from the clinic with what looked like relief on her face, Daniel's arm around her shoulders. The timestamp showed this was 3 days after Olivia's last ultrasound appointment. "They're checking if she's pregnant," Olivia said quietly. "They want to know if there will be complications with their timeline." Bennett studied the photos with professional detachment. "This establishes premeditation. They're not just having an affair. They're planning a future together while you're carrying his child." The most damning evidence was a series of photos taken at a real estate office. Daniel and Camilla looking at apartment listings, touring a luxury condo in Lincoln Park, signing what appeared to be lease documents. The investigator had managed to confirm that Daniel had put down a deposit on a 2-bedroom unit, scheduled to be available in February, just after Olivia's due date. "He's already planning to move out," Olivia said. "The lease starts February 1st. He probably thinks he'll have filed for divorce by then. Painted me as unstable and positioned himself as the victim of a woman who couldn't handle the stress of pregnancy." "But you're filing first," Bennett said. It wasn't a question. "Yes, tomorrow." Bennett leaned back in his chair. "Mrs. Foster, I need to ask, are you prepared for what this will unleash? Your husband clearly thought he was controlling the narrative. When he discovers you've been 3 steps ahead of him, his reaction could be significant." Olivia thought about the woman she'd been just 2 weeks ago, trusting, naive, willing to believe that her husband's late nights were really about work. That woman felt like a stranger now. "Mr. Bennett, my husband has been lying to my face for months while I carry his child. He's been planning to abandon us both while pretending to be excited about becoming a father. He's stolen marital assets to fund his affair and consulted with his lawyer about how to make me look crazy." She paused, feeling the baby kick strongly against her ribs. "I'm not worried about his reaction. I'm counting on it." "What do you mean?" "Daniel's greatest weakness is his arrogance. He thinks he's the smartest person in every room. When he realizes I've outmaneuvered him, he'll get angry. And angry people make mistakes." Bennett smiled for the first time during their meeting. "You know, Mrs. Foster, in 30 years of family law, I've learned that the most dangerous opponents are the ones who've been underestimated. Your husband has no idea what's about to hit him." "That's the point," Olivia replied. They spent the next hour finalizing the divorce petition. Bennett had structured it to request full custody, primary residence of the family home, and an equitable distribution of assets that would account for Daniel's dissipation of marital funds. The document was thorough, professional, and devastating. "We'll file first thing tomorrow morning," Bennett said. "Service of process will happen at his office. Given the evidence we have, I suspect the judge will be very interested in Mr. Foster's financial irregularities." As Olivia prepared to leave, Bennett asked one final question. "Mrs. Foster, do you want to try mediation first? Some couples find it less adversarial." Olivia thought about Daniel's email to his lawyer, about Camilla's hand on his arm at dinner, about months of lies told with such casual cruelty. "Mr. Bennett, my husband declared war on this marriage the moment he started planning my destruction. I'm just making sure I win." That evening, Olivia sat in the nursery she'd been preparing for months. The crib was assembled. The mobile hung carefully above it, tiny clothes washed and folded in the dresser, everything ready for the baby who would be born into a very different world than the one they'd originally planned. Her phone buzzed. A text from Daniel. "Working late again. Morrison project crisis. Don't wait up." Olivia looked at the message, then at the investigator's photos on her phone. Daniel and Camilla having dinner at an expensive steakhouse at that exact moment, laughing and holding hands like teenagers in love. She typed back, "No problem. I love you." Let him think he was winning for one more night. Tomorrow, everything would change. As she placed her hand on her belly, feeling their child move restlessly inside her, Olivia made a promise. "Your father may have abandoned us before you were even born, but you'll never doubt that your mother fought for you, and won." Outside, Chicago glittered in the November darkness, unaware that in one quiet nursery, a woman was putting the finishing touches on the most important battle of her life. Daniel Foster was in his element. Standing before the conference room at Foster Architectural, presenting the final Morrison project designs to potential investors, he commanded the room with the confidence of a man who believed his life was perfectly under control. Camilla sat at the far end of the table, taking notes with the focused attention of someone who was more than just a junior architect. She was his partner in every sense that mattered. "As you can see," Daniel said, clicking to the next slide, "the projected ROI on this development exceeds all initial projections by 15%. It was 2:47 p.m. on a Tuesday afternoon in late November, when everything Daniel Foster had carefully planned came crashing down. The conference room door opened and his secretary Lynn stepped inside with an expression of barely controlled panic. "Mr. Foster, I'm sorry to interrupt, but there's a process server here who insists on speaking with you immediately." Daniel's presentation rhythm faltered for just a moment. "Can't it wait? We're in the middle of—" "I'm afraid not, sir. He says it's legally urgent." The investors exchanged glances. Camilla's pen stopped moving across her notepad. "Excuse me for just a moment," Daniel said, his professional smile never wavering. "Please continue reviewing the financial projections on page 12. In the hallway, a middle-aged man in a gray suit waited with the patience of someone who'd done this thousands of times before. "Daniel Foster?" "Yes. You've been served." The man placed a thick manila envelope in Daniel's hands. "Have a good day, sir." Daniel stood in the hallway of his own company, holding papers that would change his life forever, while through the conference room glass, he could see Camilla watching him with growing concern. The divorce petition was thorough, professional, and devastating. Foster versus Foster. Petition for dissolution of marriage. As Daniel's eyes scanned the documents, his world shifted beneath his feet. Olivia wasn't just filing for divorce. She was dismantling him piece by piece. The petition requested full custody of their unborn child, primary residence of the family home, spousal support, and, most damaging of all, a complete forensic accounting of all marital assets for the past 2 years. Attached to the petition were photocopies that made Daniel's blood run cold, bank statements showing transfers to Camilla's account, hotel receipts, restaurant charges, the jewelry store purchase, even the lease agreement for the Lincoln Park apartment he'd signed just days ago. But it was the final attachment that made him grip the wall for support. Photographs, dozens of them, Daniel and Camilla at restaurants, walking through parks, kissing in parking garages, professional surveillance photos that could only mean one thing. Olivia had hired an investigator. His phone buzzed. A text from Olivia. "Hope your day is going well. Can't wait to see you tonight. We need to talk." The casual tone of the message, sent just minutes after he'd been served with divorce papers, told Daniel everything he needed to know about his wife's state of mind. This wasn't emotional breakdown or postpartum instability. This was calculated warfare. Daniel burst back into the conference room, his face pale and his hands shaking slightly. "I'm afraid we need to reschedule," he announced to the bewildered investors. "A family emergency has come up." As the room cleared, Camilla approached him with the kind of concern that made his chest tighten. "Daniel, what's wrong? You look like you've seen a ghost." He handed her the divorce petition without a word. Camilla's face went through a series of expressions as she read. Confusion, shock, and finally fear. When she reached the photographs, her hands began to tremble. "She knows," Camilla whispered. "She knows everything." "Not everything," Daniel said, trying to regain some control of the situation. "These are just photos. Circumstantial evidence." "My lawyer said." "Your lawyer?" Camilla's voice rose. "Daniel, she has our bank records. She knows about the apartment. She has photos of us at the fertility clinic." Camilla's face crumpled. "Oh God, what if people at work find out? What if my parents—" "Camilla, calm down." "Calm down?" She stared at him with growing panic. "She's going to destroy us. Look at this petition. She's asking for everything." The house, custody, spousal support. She's painted you as an adulterer who stole marital assets to fund an affair. Daniel snatched the papers back, reading more carefully this time. Theodore Bennett, Olivia's lawyer, had structured the petition like a prosecutor building a criminal case. Every charge, every request, every demand was backed by documented evidence. His phone rang. Garrett Westfield, his lawyer. "Daniel, we have a problem," Westfield said without preamble. "I just received a copy of your wife's petition. This is not the emotional breakdown we were expecting. I can see that. The evidence she's compiled is extensive, and frankly, my advice to you about documenting her instability, those emails are going to be problematic if this goes to trial." Daniel felt something cold settle in his stomach. "What do you mean?" "I mean, a family court judge is going to look very unfavorably on a husband who was coached to manufacture evidence of his pregnant wife's mental state while conducting an affair. This makes us both look terrible." Through the conference room windows, Daniel could see his employees going about their normal Tuesday afternoon routines, unaware that their boss's life was imploding in real time. "What are my options?" Daniel asked. "Honestly? Damage control. She's filed first, she has documentation of asset dissipation, and she's 36 weeks pregnant. Any judge is going to be sympathetic to her position. We need to focus on negotiating the best possible settlement." "Settlement?" Daniel's voice cracked. "I built this company from nothing. I'm not handing over half of everything I've worked for. Daniel, the alternative is a trial where all of this becomes public record. Do you want photos of you and Ms. Rhodes entered as evidence in a public courtroom? Do you want your business associates reading transcripts of your affair?" Camilla had been listening to every word. When Daniel hung up, she was crying quietly, her carefully applied makeup running in black streaks down her cheeks. "I can't do this," she whispered. I thought when you left her we'd just start fresh. I didn't think about lawyers and trials and public records." "Camilla." "No, Daniel. Look at this." She held up her phone, showing him a Google search of divorce records. "These things are public, anyone can look them up. My name is going to be in court documents forever. Every time someone Googles me, they'll find records of me breaking up a marriage." The conference room felt like it was shrinking around them. Daniel had spent months planning his exit from his marriage, carefully positioning himself for a clean break that would leave him financially secure and morally blameless. Instead, Olivia had turned him into the villain of his own story. "She played us," he said, the realization hitting him like a physical blow. "All this time we thought she was just the housewife getting ready for the baby. She was building a case." Camilla wiped her eyes, smearing her mascara further. "What happens now?" Daniel looked at the divorce petition again, at the photographs that documented months of lies, at the financial records that showed exactly how much marital money he'd spent on another woman. "Now," he said quietly, "we find out just how much our choices are going to cost us." Outside Foster Architectural, Chicago moved through its regular Tuesday rhythm, but inside Conference Room B, two people sat surrounded by the wreckage of their carefully planned deception, learning the hard way that some victories come with prices too high to pay. Daniel's phone buzzed with another text from Olivia. "Dinner's at 7. Don't be late. We have so much to discuss." For the first time in months, Daniel Foster was afraid to go home. The Foster family home had never felt more like a battleground than it did at 7:23 p.m. on that November evening. Daniel sat in his car in the driveway for 10 minutes, divorce papers spread across his passenger seat, trying to summon the courage to face the woman he thought he knew. Olivia had set the dining room table for two. Candles flickered softly between their best china, and the smell of pot roast, Daniel's childhood favorite, filled the air with domestic warmth that felt surreal given the circumstances. At 36 weeks pregnant, she moved with deliberate grace, arranging napkins and adjusting silverware like a woman preparing for a pleasant evening with her husband. "You're late," she said, when Daniel finally entered, her voice carrying the same gentle tone she'd used throughout their 7-year marriage. "I was starting to worry." Daniel stood in the doorway, still wearing his suit from the office, the manila envelope containing her petition clutched in his hand like evidence of a crime. "Olivia, we need to talk." "I know." She gestured to his chair with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "That's why I made dinner. Sit down, Daniel. You look pale." The normalcy of the scene made everything more unsettling. Here was his pregnant wife, serving him pot roast and mashed potatoes, acting as if she hadn't just detonated his entire life with surgical precision. "You hired an investigator," Daniel said, remaining standing. "I did." Olivia settled carefully into her chair, her hand instinctively moving to her belly. Harrison Blake. Very thorough. You should see his reports. They read like a novel. How long have you known? About Camilla? Since the night you brought her to dinner 3 weeks ago. Olivia cut into her roast with practiced ease. About your lawyer consultations? About the apartment you rented for February? About the 8 months of lies? She looked up at him. I've known for 2 weeks. Daniel felt his legs give out beneath him and he collapsed into his chair. Olivia, I can explain. Can you? Her voice remained conversational, almost curious. Can you explain why you took Camilla to the fertility clinic where I had my treatments? Can you explain why you used our joint credit card to buy her a promise ring? Can you explain the email where you asked your lawyer how to make me look mentally unstable? Each question landed like a physical blow. Daniel had spent the afternoon thinking he might be able to salvage something from this disaster, maybe negotiate a settlement that wouldn't destroy him completely. Now he realized he was facing an opponent who had already won the war before he'd even known it was being fought. The baby, he started, grasping for something. Anything. Olivia, this doesn't have to affect the baby. We can work out. The baby. Olivia's fork paused halfway to her mouth. Let's talk about the baby, Daniel. Our child, who you were planning to abandon before he was even born. The child you discussed with your lawyer like a liability to be managed. She reached into the cabinet beside her chair and withdrew a folder that made Daniel's stomach drop. Harrison Blake is very thorough, she repeated, opening the folder. Did you know that Camilla has been taking pregnancy tests every month since August? Did you know you've been paying for them through your company's health spending account? Daniel's face went white. 4 negative tests, Daniel. 4 months of relief that your affair wasn't going to be complicated by an unplanned pregnancy. Olivia's voice never rose above a conversational tone, which made her words more devastating. Were you hoping my pregnancy would end the way my last one did? Would that have made things easier for you? Olivia, stop. Stop what? Stop telling the truth? Stop being the wife who actually paid attention to what her husband was doing? She leaned forward slightly. I trusted you, Daniel. For 7 years, I trusted you completely. Even when we lost the first baby, even through the fertility treatments, even when you started working late every night, I trusted you. Daniel tried to speak, but she continued. Do you know what the worst part is? It's not even the affair. People have affairs. Marriages end. Hearts break and people move on. Her hand moved to her belly again. The worst part is that you were so cruel about it. The lawyer consultations about making me look crazy. The planning to abandon your pregnant wife while pretending to be excited about becoming a father. The sheer calculation of it all. I never meant for it to happen this way. Yes, you did. Olivia's voice carried absolute certainty. You meant for it to happen exactly this way. You wanted me to be the emotional pregnant woman who couldn't handle losing her husband. You wanted to be the reasonable man whose wife had a breakdown. You wanted to keep your business, your money, and your reputation while I got the blame for destroying our family. She stood up slowly, her pregnant form imposing in a way Daniel had never noticed before. But here's what you didn't count on, Daniel. You married someone smarter than you gave her credit for. Someone who learned from your own playbook about documentation and preparation. Someone who loves this baby enough to fight for him even when his father doesn't. Daniel felt tears he didn't expect burning behind his eyes. Olivia, please. We can fix this. We can go to counseling. We can't fix this. Her voice was gentle but final. You can't unfake 8 months of lies. You can't unspend the money you stole from our marriage to fund your affair. You can't unwrite the emails where you planned my destruction. She moved to the window that looked out onto their backyard, where the swing set Daniel had built stood empty in the November twilight. I loved you, she said quietly. I loved you so much that I convinced myself your distance was work stress. I loved you so much that I blamed myself when you stopped touching me, stopped talking to me, stopped seeing me. I loved you so much that I made excuses for you even when every instinct I had screamed that something was wrong. Live, but love isn't enough. Is it, Daniel? Love doesn't fix lies. Love doesn't fix betrayal. And love certainly doesn't fix a man who could look his pregnant wife in the eye every morning and lie about where he'd been the night before. The dining room fell silent, except for the soft ticking of the grandfather clock in the corner. Daniel stared at his dinner, untouched and growing cold, while his wife, his soon-to-be ex-wife, stood outlined against the window like a figure in a painting of domestic tragedy. What happens now? He asked. Olivia turned back to him, and for a moment, he saw a flicker of the woman he'd fallen in love with 9 years ago, but it was gone quickly, replaced by someone harder, Someone who'd learned that survival sometimes required becoming someone you never thought you'd be. Now you move out. Tonight. Pack whatever you need and go to Camilla's apartment, or the Lincoln Park place you rented for February. I don't care where you go, but you don't sleep in this house tonight. Olivia, Theodore Bennett will be in touch with your lawyer about mediation. If you're reasonable, we can handle this quietly. If you fight me, everything becomes public record. Every photo, every receipt, every lie. And Daniel? She met his eyes directly. You know I have enough evidence to bury you. Daniel sat in his chair, surrounded by the remnants of the life he'd destroyed, and finally understood the magnitude of his miscalculation. He'd thought he was playing chess while his pregnant wife arranged baby clothes and prepared for motherhood. Instead, she'd been building a case that would ensure he lost everything that mattered. Can I? His voice cracked. Can I say goodbye to the baby? Olivia's hand moved to her belly, protective and fierce. You said goodbye to this baby the moment you decided to abandon him, she said quietly. But don't worry, Daniel. He'll know his father's name. And someday, when he's old enough to understand, he'll know exactly what kind of man his father chose to be. As Daniel climbed the stairs to pack a bag for his exile, Olivia remained in the dining room, her hand on her belly, making promises to the child who would soon enter a world very different from the one she'd originally imagined. But it would be a world where he was wanted, where he was fought for, and where his mother had proven that love, real love, sometimes means being strong enough to walk away from the people who no longer deserve it. 3 days after Daniel moved out, Olivia discovered that rebuilding a life was harder than dismantling one. At 36 weeks pregnant, she sat in the kitchen that had once felt like the heart of her home, now echoing with an emptiness that had nothing to do with Daniel's absence and everything to do with the weight of what came next. Her sister Jenna had driven up from Springfield the morning after the confrontation, taking one look at Olivia's pale face and immediately launching into protective mode. You look exhausted, Jenna said, setting a cup of decaffeinated coffee in front of her sister. When's the last time you actually slept? Sleep is overrated, Olivia replied, though the dark circles under her eyes told a different story. I have too much to do before the baby comes. The past 72 hours had been a whirlwind of practical devastation. Daniel's hasty departure had left gaps everywhere. His name on the mortgage, shared credit cards that needed to be frozen, insurance policies that required immediate attention. Being abandoned while 36 weeks pregnant, Olivia was learning, came with a bureaucratic nightmare that made the emotional trauma feel almost simple by comparison. Bennett called this morning, Olivia said, scrolling through emails on her laptop. Daniel's lawyer wants to schedule mediation for next week. Next week? You could go into labor any day. That's what I told Bennett. Apparently Garrett Westfield is trying to fast-track everything before the baby arrives. Thinks it'll be easier to negotiate with me while I'm still pregnant rather than dealing with a newborn and postpartum recovery. Jenna snorted. These men really think you're going to fall apart, don't they? Olivia looked out the kitchen window toward the house next door, where Eleanor Henley, their 70-year-old neighbor, was tending her garden with the methodical precision of someone who'd weathered many storms. Yesterday, Mrs. Henley had appeared at Olivia's door with a casserole and the kind of practical wisdom that only came from decades of watching marriages rise and fall. Marriage is like a garden, Mrs. Henley had said, settling into the kitchen chair Daniel used to occupy. Some people nurture it, some people neglect it, and some people salt the earth so nothing good can ever grow again. Your husband salted the earth, dear, but that doesn't mean you can't plant something beautiful somewhere else. The doorbell rang, interrupting Olivia's thoughts. Through the front window, she could see a silver BMW in the driveway, Camilla's car. Oh, this should be interesting, Jenna muttered, moving toward the window. Camilla Rhodes stood on the front porch looking nothing like the confident woman who'd sat in this very dining room 3 weeks ago. Her usually perfect hair was pulled back in a messy ponytail, and her designer clothes looked like she'd slept in them. Most tellingly, she'd been crying. Olivia? Camilla said when the door opened, her voice barely above a whisper. Can we talk? I can't think of anything we have to discuss, Olivia replied calmly. Please, just 5 minutes. I need to… Camilla's voice cracked. I need to explain. Against her better judgment and Jenna's obvious disapproval, Olivia stepped aside to let her in. In the living room, surrounded by baby shower gifts that friends had started dropping off, Camilla looked small and defeated. She perched on the edge of the sofa like someone ready to flee at any moment. I didn't know, she began, then stopped herself. That's not true. I did know. I knew you were pregnant. I knew you were married. I knew Daniel was lying to you every day. I didn't think about what that meant for you." Olivia remained standing, her hand resting on her belly where the baby had been unusually active all morning. "What did you think it meant, Camilla?" "I thought," Camilla wiped her eyes with the back of her hand, "I thought you didn't love him anymore. He said your marriage was over and everything but paperwork. He said you were staying together for the baby but that you were both miserable. And you believed him." I wanted to believe him. Camilla's honesty was brutal in its simplicity. "I'm 26 years old, Olivia. I've never been married, never been pregnant, never had to think about what happens when love gets complicated by real life. When Daniel paid attention to me, when he took me to nice restaurants and bought me jewelry and talked about our future, it felt like a fairy tale." Jenna made a disgusted sound from the kitchen doorway. "But fairy tales don't include divorce lawyers and private investigators," Olivia said. "No, they don't." Camilla looked around the living room, taking in the baby gifts, the ultrasound photos on the mantel, the evidence of a life being prepared for. "The past 3 days have been hell. Daniel's been staying at my apartment, and he's not the man I thought he was." "What do you mean?" Camilla hesitated, then seemed to make a decision. "He's angry all the time. Angry at you for outsmarting him. Angry at his lawyer for not preparing him better. Angry at me for not being more supportive. He keeps saying this is all your fault, that you're trying to destroy him out of spite. And what do you think? I think you're trying to protect your baby." Camilla's voice was so quiet it was almost inaudible. "I think you did exactly what any mother would do when she found out her husband was planning to abandon her and her child." The baby kicked hard, and Olivia winced slightly. "Why are you here, Camilla?" "Because I'm scared." The admission seemed to surprise Camilla herself. "I'm scared of what Daniel becomes when he doesn't get his way. I'm scared that everyone at work knows about us now. I'm scared that my parents are going to find out their daughter broke up a marriage." She looked up at Olivia with desperate eyes. "And I'm scared that I'm going to spend the rest of my life being known as the other woman who destroyed a family." Olivia studied the younger woman for a long moment. 3 weeks ago, Camilla had sat in this same room, laughing and touching Daniel's arm and offering opinions about baby names like she had every right to insert herself into their family. Now she looked like someone who'd finally understood the true cost of her choices. "What do you want from me?" Olivia asked. "I don't know." Camilla's tears started fresh. "Forgiveness, maybe? Understanding? I know I don't deserve either of those things, but—" "You're right," Olivia interrupted. "You don't deserve them. You don't deserve my forgiveness for sleeping with my husband. You don't deserve my understanding for helping him plan to abandon his pregnant wife. And you certainly don't deserve my sympathy because you're finally facing consequences for your actions." Camilla flinched as if she'd been slapped. "But," Olivia continued, "I'm not going to carry the weight of hating you. I'm going to have a baby in a few weeks, and I'm going to rebuild my life, and I'm going to be happy. Your guilt, your fear, your regret, those are your burdens to carry, not mine." "Olivia, you made your choices, Camilla. You chose to believe a married man's lies because they made you feel special. You chose to ignore the pregnant wife because thinking about me made your fairy tale uncomfortable. You chose to help plan my destruction because it served your vision of your future." Olivia moved toward the front door. "Now you get to live with those choices." As Camilla stood to leave, she turned back one last time. "For what it's worth," she said, "I am sorry. Not because I got caught, not because it's hard now, but because you didn't deserve any of this. You seem like a good person, and your baby is lucky to have you." After Camilla left, Olivia and Jenna sat in the living room surrounded by the quiet that follows emotional storms. "Well," Jenna said finally, "that was unexpected." "She's going to leave him," Olivia said with certainty. "How do you know?" "Because she's 26 and she thought she was getting a successful, charming man who would take care of her. Instead, she's gotten a bitter, angry man who's about to lose half his assets and whose reputation is destroyed. The fairy tale is over." That evening, as Olivia prepared for bed in the house that now felt more like sanctuary than prison, her phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. "This isn't over. You think you've won, but you have no idea what you've started. I won't let you destroy everything I've worked for." Olivia stared at the message, recognizing Daniel's anger even through the digital distance. Then she forwarded it to Theodore Bennett with a simple note. More evidence for the file. As she turned off the lights and settled into bed, the first time in years she'd gone to sleep without wondering where her husband really was, Olivia felt something she hadn't experienced in months. Peace. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new complications, new battles to fight. But tonight, in the quiet of her own home, carrying the child she would raise alone but never unloved, Olivia Foster finally felt free. 5 days after Camilla's unexpected visit, Daniel Foster's carefully constructed world began collapsing in ways he never anticipated. It started with a phone call at 7:43 a.m. while he sat in Camilla's cramped apartment kitchen, drinking coffee that tasted like regret and scrolling through legal documents that might as well have been written in a foreign language. "Daniel, we have a problem." Garrett Westfield's voice carried the kind of professional panic that made expensive lawyers suddenly seem worth their hourly rates. "The forensic accountant found irregularities in your business accounts that go beyond what your wife documented." Daniel set down his coffee cup with hands that weren't quite steady. "What kind of irregularities?" "The kind that could interest the IRS. When you transferred funds to pay for Ms. Rhodes's rent and personal expenses, you categorize them as business consulting fees. That's tax fraud, Daniel. And it's not just a civil matter anymore." Through the thin walls of Camilla's apartment, Daniel could hear her in the shower, singing off-key like someone trying to convince herself that everything was normal. 3 days of living together had shattered both their illusions about what their relationship could withstand under pressure. "How bad is it?" Daniel asked. "Bad enough that I'm recommending you hire a criminal defense attorney. And Daniel, the mediation with your wife just became the least of your problems." After hanging up, Daniel sat in the kitchen of an apartment that smelled like someone else's life, surrounded by furniture that wasn't his and commitments he was no longer sure he wanted. When Camilla emerged from the bathroom, wrapped in a towel and looking younger than her 26 years, he saw her clearly for the first time in months. "You look terrible," she said, toweling her hair. "Did you sleep at all last night?" "I need to go into the office," Daniel replied, avoiding her question. The truth was that he'd spent the night staring at the ceiling, wondering how a plan that had seemed so reasonable 8 months ago had turned him into someone facing potential criminal charges. "Again? Daniel, you've been at the office until midnight every day this week. When are we going to talk about what happens next?" "What happens next is that I try to save what's left of my business while my wife destroys everything else." Camilla stopped toweling her hair and looked at him with the kind of clarity that comes from finally seeing someone without the filter of infatuation. "This isn't Olivia's fault and you know it." "Excuse me? This mess. Your legal problems, your business issues, the fact that you're living in my apartment instead of your house. None of that is because Olivia outsmarted you. It's because you made choices. We made choices. Bad ones." Daniel stood up abruptly, his chair scraping against the floor. "I'm not going to sit here and listen to you blame me for what? For the affair we had? For the money you stole from your marriage to pay my rent? For the lies we told ourselves about how this would all work out?" Camilla wrapped the towel tighter around herself like armor. "I was there for all of it, Daniel. I participated in all of it, but I'm not going to pretend it was anyone's fault but ours." At Foster Architectural, the atmosphere had shifted in ways that made Daniel's skin crawl. Conversation stopped when he walked into rooms. His secretary, Lynn, who'd worked for him for 4 years, now addressed him with the kind of professional distance usually reserved for strangers. The divorce papers being served in front of clients and investors had created a ripple effect that was drowning his reputation in whispered speculation. Mr. Foster? Harrison Wells, his lead project manager, appeared in his office doorway with the expression of someone delivering bad news. "The Morrison project investors called a meeting for this afternoon. They want to discuss some concerns about the company's stability." "What kind of concerns?" "The kind that happen when clients start questioning whether their architect is going to be available to complete projects or if he'll be dealing with legal issues that might affect timelines." Daniel felt something cold settle in his chest. The Morrison project wasn't just his biggest contract. It was the foundation for everything he'd built. Losing it would mean losing the financial security he'd thought would protect him through the divorce. "Schedule the meeting," he said. "And Harrison? Draft a statement about the company's commitment to all existing projects regardless of any personal matters." "Already done," Harrison replied. "But Daniel, you might want to consider that some personal matters become business matters when they involve company funds and company employees." The afternoon meeting was a masterclass in professional humiliation. The Morrison project investors, led by a steel-haired woman named Patricia Brennan, didn't waste time with pleasantries. "Mr. Foster, we've become aware of some complications in your personal life that may affect this project," Brennan said, her voice carrying the kind of authority that built commercial empires. "Specifically, we're concerned about reports of financial irregularities and potential legal issues." Mrs. Brennan, I can assure you that my personal situation has no bearing on my professional commitments. Doesn't it? She slid a folder across the conference table. We've done our own research, Mr. Foster. Public divorce records, courthouse filings, even some financial documentation that raises questions about how company funds have been managed. Daniel opened the folder to find copies of his own divorce petition, complete with the devastating evidence Olivia had compiled. Seeing his private humiliation reduced to public record in a business meeting felt like being stripped naked in front of strangers. The Morrison project represents a significant investment, another investor added. We need assurance that our architect won't be distracted by legal proceedings, criminal investigations, or personal drama that could delay completion. Criminal investigations? Daniel's voice cracked slightly. Tax fraud allegations have a way of becoming public knowledge, Mr. Foster, especially when they involve business funds being used for personal expenses. The meeting ended with a decision that felt like a death sentence. The Morrison project was being suspended pending resolution of Daniel's legal issues. Not canceled, suspended, which meant everything he'd worked for was hanging in limbo, dependent on his ability to clean up a mess that grew more complicated every day. That evening, Daniel returned to Camilla's apartment to find her sitting at her small dining table with her laptop open and several printed pages spread around her. We need to talk, she said without looking up. If this is about the apartment being temporary, it's about my resignation letter. Daniel felt the world shift beneath his feet again. You're what? I'm quitting Foster Architectural. I'm leaving Chicago. Camilla finally looked at him and her expression was resigned rather than angry. I called my parents today and told them everything. They're disappointed, obviously, but they want me to come home to Denver until I figure out what's next. Camilla, you don't have to. Yes, I do. She gestured to her laptop screen, which showed job listings in Colorado. Daniel, I'm 26 years old. I have my whole career ahead of me, but not if I stay here and become known as the woman who helped destroy a marriage and break up a family. Not if I stay in a relationship with a man who's facing criminal charges for stealing money to fund our affair. Those charges aren't what? Serious? Real? Your problem? Camilla closed her laptop with a decisive snap. They're all of those things, Daniel. And I'm not going to ruin the rest of my life because I made bad choices for 8 months. Daniel sat heavily in the chair across from her, feeling like a man watching his life disappear piece by piece. What about us? He asked. Camilla looked at him with something that might have been pity. There is no us, Daniel. There never really was. There was just you running away from your marriage and me being young and stupid enough to think I was special. But we were never really building something together. We were just tearing down what you had with someone else. She stood up and moved to the window that looked out onto a Chicago street that had never felt like home. Olivia was right about something, Camilla said quietly. I have to live with my choices, but I don't have to keep making bad ones. As Daniel sat in the apartment that would soon be empty, surrounded by the wreckage of plans that had never been as solid as he'd believed, he finally understood what Olivia had tried to tell him that night in their dining room. Some victories come with prices too high to pay. Outside, Chicago hummed with the energy of people building lives instead of destroying them, while inside, a man learned that when you salt the earth, nothing grows, not even the future you thought you were fighting for. On a crisp December morning, exactly 6 weeks after Daniel moved out, Olivia Foster went into labor at 4:17 a.m. She woke to the familiar tightening across her belly, but this time it didn't fade away like the Braxton Hicks contractions she'd been experiencing for weeks. This time, her body was announcing that her son was ready to meet the world. Jenna had been staying in the guest room for the past week, anticipating this moment. When Olivia knocked gently on her door, her sister was instantly alert with the reflexes of someone who'd been through labor twice herself. Is it time? Jenna asked, already reaching for her clothes. I think so, Olivia replied, one hand on her belly and the other gripping the doorframe as another contraction rolled through her. They're about 7 minutes apart. By 6:30 a.m., they were at Northwestern Memorial Hospital, where Dr. Miranda Torres, Olivia's obstetrician, confirmed what Olivia already knew in her heart. Her baby was coming today. Everything looks perfect, Dr. Torres said after examining her. You're progressing beautifully. Have you been in contact with the baby's father about the delivery? Olivia had been dreading this question for weeks. The divorce mediation had been scheduled and rescheduled 3 times due to Daniel's criminal defense attorney's schedule. Their last communication had been through lawyers, cold and professional exchanges about custody arrangements and child support calculations. He's been notified, Olivia said simply. It was true. Theodore Bennett had called Garrett Westfield that morning with the news that his client's ex-wife was in labor. What Daniel chose to do with that information was no longer her concern. Labor progressed through the morning with the determined rhythm of something that had been waiting too long to happen. Jenna held Olivia's hand through contractions, coached her through breathing exercises, and provided the steady presence that Olivia had once imagined would come from her husband. At 11:47 a.m., as Chicago bustled through its Tuesday routine outside the hospital windows, Oliver Theodore Foster entered the world weighing 7 pounds, 3 ounces, with dark hair like his father's, and lungs that announced his arrival with impressive volume. "He's perfect, Doctor," Torres said, placing the baby on Olivia's chest. "Absolutely perfect." Olivia looked down at her son, not their son anymore, and felt a love so fierce it took her breath away. Here was the person she'd fought for, the reason she'd found strength she didn't know she possessed, the future that mattered more than any past she was leaving behind. "Hello, Oliver," she whispered, touching his tiny fingers with wonder. "I've been waiting to meet you." It was 2:15 p.m. when Daniel finally appeared in the hospital corridor, looking like a man who'd aged years in the past 6 weeks. His usually perfect hair was disheveled, his expensive suit wrinkled, and his eyes carried the hollow look of someone who'd been sleeping poorly for too long. Jenna intercepted him before he could reach Olivia's room. "She's resting," Jenna said firmly. "The baby was born this morning. Oliver Theodore Foster. 7 pounds, 3 ounces. Healthy." "I want to see him," Daniel said. "I want to see my son." "Your son." Jenna's voice carried 7 years of protective fury. "Where were you when she was in labor for 8 hours? Where were you when she needed someone to hold her hand through the hardest thing she's ever done?" "I came as soon as I could. I was dealing with..." "With what, Daniel? Your criminal defense attorney? Your bankruptcy lawyer? Your public relations consultant?" Jenna stepped closer. "Because while you were dealing with the consequences of your choices, your son was being born, and his mother did it alone, just like she's going to raise him." Through the window of Olivia's room, Daniel could see her holding a small bundle wrapped in blue hospital blankets. Even exhausted from labor, she looked radiant in a way that made his chest ache with loss. "5 minutes," Jenna said finally. "And if you say anything that upsets her, I will personally escort you out of this hospital." When Daniel entered the room, Olivia looked up from the baby with eyes that held no anger, no resentment, just a calm certainty that was somehow more devastating than fury would have been. "His name is Oliver," she said simply. "Oliver Theodore Foster." "Theodore? After your lawyer? After my grandfather. And because Bennett has been more supportive of this baby than his father ever was." Daniel moved closer to the bed, and Olivia adjusted the blanket so he could see Oliver's face. The baby was sleeping peacefully, his tiny features perfect and unmarked by the chaos that had surrounded his arrival. "He's beautiful," Daniel whispered, and for a moment something cracked in his carefully maintained composure. "Olivia, Don't," she said gently. "Whatever you're about to say, don't. This isn't the time for apologies or explanations or regrets. This is time for you to meet your son." Daniel reached out tentatively, and Olivia shifted slightly so he could touch Oliver's hand. The baby's fingers wrapped instinctively around his father's finger, and Daniel felt tears he'd been holding back for weeks finally spill over. "I know I messed up," he said quietly. "I know I ruined everything, but I want to be part of his life. I want to be a good father." Olivia studied his face for a long moment. "Being a good father isn't about wanting, Daniel. It's about choosing. Every day, it's about putting your child's needs before your own wants, your own convenience, your own desires. It's about being reliable and honest and present. I can do that. Can you? Because for the past 8 months you chose Camilla over your family. You chose lies over honesty. You chose planning my destruction over protecting your child." Olivia's voice remained calm, but her words cut deep. "Being a father means making different choices. Better choices, do you understand that?" Daniel nodded, though they both knew understanding and implementing were different things entirely. "There will be a custody schedule," Olivia continued. "Supervised visits at first until the court determines what's in Oliver's best interest. Child support will be calculated based on your actual income, not what you claim after paying your legal fees. And Daniel, if you ever put our son in a position where he questions whether his father wants him, these visits will end." Oliver stirred in her arms, making the small sounds of a baby discovering the world outside the womb. Olivia looked down at him with a smile that transformed her entire face. But right now, she said, he's perfect, and he's here, and that's all that matters. Daniel spent another few minutes with his son, memorizing the tiny features, the weight of responsibility that felt both overwhelming and insufficient. When he finally left, Olivia was singing softly to Oliver, a lullaby her own mother had sung to her years ago. That evening, as Chicago settled into December darkness outside her hospital window, Olivia sat in the quiet of her room with Oliver sleeping peacefully in her arms. Jenna had gone home to shower and pack a bag for the next day, and the nurses had dimmed the lights for the night. Her phone buzzed with a text from her neighbor, Mrs. Henley. "Congratulations, dear. Can't wait to meet the little prince when you're ready for visitors." Another from her colleague Sarah. "He's beautiful. Take all the time you need. Your job will be here when you're ready." And one from Theodore Bennett. "Congratulations on the arrival of your son. The custody paperwork will be ready when you are. Rest and enjoy these first days." As Olivia scrolled through messages of love and support from the network of people who had rallied around her during the hardest months of her life, she realized something that would have seemed impossible 6 weeks ago. She was happy, not despite being alone, not in spite of the challenges ahead, but genuinely, deeply happy. Oliver opened his eyes and looked up at her with the unfocused gaze of someone just beginning to see the world. "It's just you and me now," she whispered to him. "And you know what? That's exactly how it should be." Outside, Chicago hummed with the energy of 8 million people living their complicated lives. But inside room 314, a mother and son began the simple, extraordinary work of building a family based on love instead of lies, on presence instead of promises, on the kind of foundation that could weather any storm. 18 months after Oliver's birth, the divorce settlement was finalized on a humid June morning in Judge Patricia Morrison's courtroom. Olivia sat beside Theodore Bennett, Oliver sleeping peacefully in his carrier at her feet, while across the aisle, Daniel and his newly hired fourth attorney, his previous 3 had either dropped him or been fired, awaited the judge's final ruling. The man sitting across from her bore little resemblance to the confident architect who had once commanded boardrooms and built his business empire. Daniel's hair was graying at the temples. His once expensive suits had been replaced by department store alternatives, and his hands trembled slightly as he reviewed the settlement documents that would legally end their marriage. Judge Morrison, a stern woman in her 50s who had presided over thousands of divorce cases, reviewed the financial documentation with the thoroughness that had made her reputation. "Mr. Foster," she began, her voice carrying the weight of legal authority, "the forensic accounting reveals a pattern of marital asset dissipation that spans approximately 10 months. Company funds totaling $127,000 were used for personal expenses related to your extramarital relationship. Is this correct?" "Yes, Your Honor," Daniel replied, his voice barely audible. "Additionally, your guilty plea to tax fraud charges resulted in a federal conviction and a sentence of 18 months probation, community service, and substantial penalties. Is this also correct?" "Yes, Your Honor." Olivia felt no satisfaction in watching Daniel's public humiliation. The man she had once loved enough to marry was disappearing piece by piece, replaced by someone bitter and broken. But she felt no sympathy either. Some consequences, she had learned, were exactly as severe as they needed to be. "Mrs. Foster," Judge Morrison continued, "given the financial misconduct and the defendant's current legal status, this court awards you 75% of all marital assets, including the family home, retirement accounts, and Mr. Foster's interest in Foster Architectural. Child support is set at $2,800 per month, subject to review based on Mr. Foster's changing financial circumstances." The settlement meant that Daniel would walk away from 7 years of marriage with essentially nothing. Foster Architectural had been sold to pay legal fees and IRS penalties. The house he had built his dreams around now belonged entirely to Olivia and Oliver. His reputation in Chicago's architectural community was so thoroughly destroyed that his only employment prospects involved working for former competitors who hired him out of pity rather than respect. After the hearing, Daniel approached Olivia in the courthouse corridor while Bennett organized paperwork, and Jenna waited with Oliver in the car. "Olivia, can we talk just for a minute?" She studied his face, noting the lines that hadn't been there a year ago, the exhaustion that seemed to live in his bones now. "What is it, Daniel?" "I'm leaving Chicago," he said. "There's a firm in Portland that's willing to hire me as a junior architect. It's not much, but it's a chance to start over somewhere people don't know my story." "What about Oliver?" That's what I wanted to talk to you about. Daniel's voice cracked slightly. I know I have visitation rights, but maybe it would be better if I just disappeared. Let you raise him without the complication of having a father who's a convicted felon. Olivia felt Oliver kick gently against her chest where he rested in his carrier, and for a moment she considered Daniel's offer. Life would certainly be simpler without court-scheduled visits, without having to explain to her son why his father lived in a studio apartment and worked at a job that barely paid his court-ordered child support. No, she said finally. No, Oliver deserves to know his father, not the man who destroyed our marriage, not the man who made terrible choices, but his father, and you deserve the chance to be better than you were. Olivia shifted Oliver's carrier to her other arm. But Daniel, if you choose to leave, if you choose to abandon him twice, there won't be a third chance. Do you understand that? Daniel nodded, tears threatening to spill over. I don't know how to be a good father anymore. I don't know how to be a good anything anymore. Then learn. Go to Portland, get your life together, and learn. But don't you dare use your guilt as an excuse to abandon your son. He didn't ask for any of this. 3 months later, Olivia received a letter postmarked from Portland. Inside was a check for Oliver's child support, paid on time for the first time since the divorce, and a short note written in Daniel's careful handwriting. Olivia, I'm in therapy. I'm working 60 hours a week at a firm where nobody knows my name, and I'm living in a place that costs half my salary. But I'm sober now, and I'm starting to understand the man I became, and why I made the choices I did. I think about Oliver every day. I hope when he's old enough to decide for himself, he'll give me a chance to be the father he deserves. Thank you for not letting me disappear. Daniel. Olivia had folded the letter and placed it in the box where she kept important documents. Someday, when Oliver was old enough to ask questions about his father, she would show him the letter. Not as evidence of Daniel's redemption, that would have to be proven through years of consistent action, but as proof that people could change, even when the cost of change felt impossibly high. Meanwhile, Camilla Rhodes had sent a single email 6 months after moving to Denver, addressed to Olivia's work account. I know I have no right to contact you and I don't expect a response. I just wanted you to know that I think about what I did every day. I'm seeing a therapist who's helping me understand how I became someone who could justify breaking up a family. I've told my parents and my new employers the truth about why I left Chicago. I'm not asking for forgiveness. I know I don't deserve it. I just wanted you to know that your strength in how you handled everything changed my life. I will never be the woman who helps destroy someone else's family again. I hope you and your son are happy. Camilla. Olivia had deleted the email without responding. Some chapters, she had learned, were meant to stay closed. On a warm September evening, Olivia sat in the backyard of the house that was now truly hers, watching 18-month-old Oliver take unsteady steps between the swing set Daniel had built 3 years ago and the garden she had planted after the divorce. Her neighbor, Mrs. Henley, sat in a lawn chair nearby, offering commentary on Oliver's adventurous spirit, with the wisdom of someone who had raised 4 children of her own. He's got your determination, Mrs. Henley observed as Oliver pulled himself up on the slide for the 10th time that evening. And your father's stubborn streak, I suspect. God help us all if that's true. Olivia laughed. Her phone buzzed with a text from her sister. Dinner Sunday? Bringing the kids so Oliver can terrorize his cousins. Another from her colleague Sarah. Coffee tomorrow morning? I have news about the promotion. And one from her mother who had moved back from Florida 6 months ago to be closer to her grandson. Dropping off groceries in the morning. Made extra lasagna for your freezer. As Olivia scrolled through messages from the network of people who had become her chosen family, she realized that the life she was building bore no resemblance to the one she had lost. It was smaller in some ways. No grand architectural firm, no expensive vacations, no elaborate social events, but it was infinitely richer in the things that actually mattered. Trust, consistency, love that didn't come with conditions or expiration dates. Oliver tottered over to her chair and reached up with both arms, the universal toddler signal for, pick me up. As she lifted him onto her lap, he babbled in the complex language of 18-month-olds, pointing at airplanes overhead and expressing opinions about butterflies with the seriousness of someone delivering important news. What do you think, buddy? She asked him. Ready to go inside and read some books? Oliver clapped his hands in approval, and Olivia gathered him up, his toys, and the sense of contentment that had taken months to build, but now felt as solid as the foundation of the house Daniel had left behind. As they headed inside, Mrs. Henley called out, Same time tomorrow, Oliver. These gardens don't supervise themselves. Later that evening, after Oliver was asleep in the crib that had once sat in a nursery prepared for a very different kind of family, Olivia stood in the kitchen where she had discovered Daniel's betrayal and felt something she had never expected to feel in this house again. Gratitude. Not gratitude for the pain, not for the betrayal, not for the months of uncertainty and fear, but gratitude for the strength she had discovered, for the life she had built from the ashes of the one that had been destroyed, for the people who had shown up when she needed them most. Outside, Chicago hummed with its eternal energy, while inside, a woman who had learned the difference between being alone and being lonely finished washing the dinner dishes and prepared for another day, in a life that was entirely, authentically, her own. 3 years after the divorce was finalized, Olivia Foster stood in the kitchen of her Chicago home, preparing dinner for a family that looked nothing like the one she had once imagined, but felt infinitely more real. Oliver, now 3.5, sat at the counter carefully arranging crayons by color while providing running commentary on his artistic process. "Mama, blue goes next to green because they're friends," he announced with the absolute certainty that only preschoolers possessed. "Is that so?" Olivia replied, stirring the pasta sauce that had become Oliver's favorite. "And what about red?" "Red is brave. Red goes by itself." The observation stopped Olivia mid-stir. Sometimes her son's innocent wisdom caught her off guard with its unexpected depth. The doorbell rang and Oliver immediately abandoned his crayon project to run toward the front door. Gamma's here." Through the window, Olivia could see her mother climbing out of her car with the energy of someone who had rediscovered purpose in grandmotherhood. Patricia Foster, who had resumed using her maiden name after her own divorce 30 years ago, had become Oliver's most devoted champion and Olivia's strongest ally. "There's my favorite artist," Patricia said, scooping Oliver into a hug that made him giggle. "Are you ready for our museum adventure tomorrow? We're going to see the dinosaurs and the big fish and the Natural History Museum." "Yes, I remember," Patricia laughed. "But first, dinner with Mama." As they settled around the kitchen table that had once hosted awkward dinners with Daniel and Camilla, Olivia marveled at how the same space could hold such different energy. Now it was filled with Oliver's chatter about preschool friends, Patricia's stories from her volunteer work at the literacy center, and the comfortable rhythm of people who genuinely enjoyed each other's company. "Speaking of adventures," Patricia said, cutting Oliver's pasta into manageable pieces, "I ran into Eleanor Henley at the grocery store today. She mentioned that the house next door is going up for sale." Olivia glanced toward the window that looked into Mrs. Henley's backyard where the 72-year-old woman could be seen tending her flowers with the same methodical care she'd shown for the 15 years Olivia had known her. "She's not moving, is she?" "Oh no, dear. The Hendersons on the other side. Apparently they're relocating to Florida. Eleanor was wondering if you might know anyone looking for a good family neighborhood." The irony wasn't lost on Olivia. 2 years ago, she had been the wife being abandoned. Now she was the stable neighbor that others looked to for community connections. After dinner, while Patricia played with Oliver in the living room, Olivia stepped onto the back deck to call Theodore Bennett. Their relationship had evolved from attorney-client to something approaching friendship, built on mutual respect and the shared experience of navigating family law's emotional minefields. "Olivia, good to hear from you." Bennett's voice carried its usual warmth. "How's our favorite client?" "Doing well. I wanted to give you an update on Daniel's situation." "Ah yes, the Portland experiment. How's that working out?" "He's been consistent with child support for 26 months now. No missed payments, no excuses. He calls Oliver every Sunday evening, and last month he sent him a birthday package with books and art supplies. That's significant progress." "It is. And I think I'm ready to discuss unsupervised visitation. Maybe a weekend in Portland this summer if Oliver wants to go." Bennett was quiet for a moment. "That's a big step, Olivia. Are you sure you're ready for that?" Olivia watched Oliver through the sliding glass door, where he was building an elaborate block tower with his grandmother's help. At 3.5, he had never known a world where his parents lived together, never experienced the tension and lies that had defined the last months of their marriage. To him this was normal. Mama and Gamma and Aunt Jenna's family and Mrs. Henley and the network of people who showed up consistently in his life. "I'm ready because Oliver deserves the chance to know his father without my anger getting in the way," she said, "and because I've finally reached the point where Daniel's choices don't define my life anymore." "That's wisdom, Olivia. Hard-earned wisdom." After hanging up, Olivia remained on the deck watching the Chicago skyline glow in the evening light. Her phone buzzed with a text from her colleague Sarah. Girls' night Friday? New tapas place downtown. Another from Jenna. Kids want to know if Oliver can come to the lake house next weekend. Fair warning, they're planning to teach him to fish. And one from Mrs. Henley. Made extra strawberry jam. Bringing some over tomorrow with my famous cookies for Oliver. The life she had built was full of small, ordinary moments that added up to something extraordinary. Stability, love, community, and the kind of happiness that didn't depend on anyone else's approval or presence. Later that evening, after Patricia had gone home and Oliver was asleep in his bedroom, the nursery had been converted to accommodate a growing boy's need for space and adventure. Olivia sat in the living room with a cup of tea and the novel she'd been slowly working through for weeks. The house felt different now than it had during her marriage. Smaller perhaps, but also more like home. She had repainted the walls in colors that made her happy, filled the shelves with books she actually wanted to read, and turned Daniel's former office into a playroom where Oliver's imagination could run wild. Her phone rang. The caller ID showed a Portland number she recognized but rarely saw these days. Hello, Daniel. Hi, Olivia. I hope I'm not calling too late. I know Oliver's bedtime is... He's already asleep. What can I do for you? I wanted to talk to you about something. I know we usually handle everything through Bennett, but this felt personal. Olivia set down her book and prepared herself for whatever complicated request or confession Daniel was about to share. I'm seeing someone, he said simply. Her name is Lauren. She's a teacher here in Portland, and she's a good person. We've been dating for about 6 months and things are getting serious. Okay, Olivia replied, surprised by her own lack of emotional reaction to the news. I wanted you to hear it from me before I mentioned her to Oliver, and I wanted to ask, if things continue to progress, if she becomes a permanent part of my life, would you be comfortable with her being around Oliver during visits? The question hung between them, loaded with the history of Daniel's previous relationship choices. But as Olivia considered her answer, she realized that the woman who had been devastated by his affair felt like a stranger to her now. The woman she had become was capable of evaluating this situation based on what was best for Oliver, not what felt like justice for past wrongs. Is she good to you? Olivia asked. She is. She's patient with my complications. She knows about my conviction, about the divorce, about Oliver. She's never asked me to choose between my past and my future. Then I hope she makes you happy, Daniel. And I hope she's good to Oliver when they meet. There was a long pause before Daniel spoke again. Olivia, I know I can never undo what I did to you, to us, to our family, but I want you to know that watching you build this life for yourself and Oliver, it's taught me more about strength and character than any therapy session or self-help book ever could. Thank you for saying that. I mean it. You deserved so much better than the man I was. Oliver is lucky to have you as his mother. After they hung up, Olivia sat in the quiet of her living room, surrounded by the life she had chosen to build from the ashes of the one that had been destroyed. She felt no jealousy about Daniel's new relationship, no anxiety about another woman entering Oliver's life, no anger about the choices that had brought them all to this point. Instead, she felt something that would have seemed impossible 3 years ago: peace. Outside, Chicago hummed with its eternal rhythm of ambition and possibility, while inside a house that had witnessed betrayal and heartbreak and ultimately rebirth, a woman who had learned the difference between loving someone and losing herself in them, prepared for another day in a life that was entirely, authentically, joyfully her own. The last thing Olivia did before heading upstairs was check on Oliver, who slept surrounded by the books and toys and evidence of a childhood built on consistency rather than chaos. Tomorrow would bring new adventures, new challenges, new opportunities to choose kindness over bitterness, growth over stagnation, hope over fear. As she turned off the lights and headed toward her own bedroom, the room she no longer shared with anyone but had never felt less lonely in, Olivia smiled at the woman she had become, someone who had faced the worst betrayal imaginable and emerged not bitter, but wise, not broken, but stronger, not diminished, but finally, completely whole. 5 years later, the wedding invitation arrived on a Tuesday morning in September, 5 years after the divorce that had changed everything. Olivia found it mixed in with Oliver's school announcements and grocery store circulars. The cream-colored envelope addressed in careful handwriting she didn't immediately recognize. Daniel Foster and Lauren Mitchell request the pleasure of your company. Olivia stared at the invitation over her coffee cup, watching 8-year-old Oliver methodically eat his cereal while explaining the complex social dynamics of third grade. The boy who had been born into chaos had grown into someone confident and curious, with his father's dark hair and his mother's steady gaze. "Mama, Tommy Peterson says his dad can fix anything with duct tape. Can you fix anything with duct tape?" "Some things," Olivia replied, still looking at the invitation. "But the important things usually require patience and time and the right tools for the job. Like when you fixed the fence after the storm?" "Exactly like that." The invitation included a handwritten note from Lauren, whom Olivia had met twice during Oliver's visits to Portland. She was exactly what Daniel needed, a quiet, steady woman who understood that loving someone meant accepting their complicated history while helping them build a better future. "Olivia, I know this might feel strange, but you and Oliver are such an important part of Daniel's life that we couldn't imagine celebrating this day without acknowledging that. We understand if attending feels inappropriate, but please know that your grace throughout this journey has been an inspiration to both of us." "Lauren, are you going to go?" Jenna asked later that afternoon as they watched Oliver and her kids play in the backyard. At 37, Olivia had grown into a version of herself that was both softer and stronger than the woman who had discovered her husband's betrayal in a locked desk drawer. "I think so," Olivia replied. "It feels like the right way to close that chapter completely. You've come a long way from the woman who used to call me crying at midnight because she couldn't figure out where her husband really was." Olivia smiled, remembering that version of herself with compassion rather than embarrassment. That woman needed to learn some things. I'm grateful she was brave enough to figure them out. The wedding took place in a small ceremony in Portland's Rose Garden, surrounded by Lauren's family and the few friends Daniel had managed to rebuild relationships with over the years. Olivia sat in the back with Oliver, who had been excited about the prospect of seeing his father get married and had spent the flight to Portland asking detailed questions about wedding traditions and whether there would be cake. Daniel looked older than his 44 years, but also more at peace than Olivia remembered him ever being during their marriage. When he exchanged vows with Lauren, speaking about second chances and learning to love without destroying what you claim to protect, Olivia felt something she had never expected: happiness for him. "Do you think they'll be happy?" Oliver whispered during the ceremony. "I think they have a good chance," Olivia whispered back. "They're both older and wiser than when your dad and I got married." At the reception, Daniel approached their table with Lauren beside him. The woman who had chosen to love a man with a criminal record and a complicated past was exactly as Olivia remembered: genuine, warm, and completely unintimidated by the ghosts of Daniel's previous life. "Thank you for coming," Daniel said, his voice carrying 5 years of gratitude and regret. "It means everything to me that Oliver could be here for this." "Of course," Olivia replied. "Family is complicated, but it doesn't have to be impossible." Lauren knelt down to Oliver's level. "Your dad talks about you all the time. He's so proud of how smart and kind you are." Oliver beamed with the confidence of a child who had never doubted that he was loved, even if that love came from complicated places. Later, as the reception wound down and Oliver dozed against her shoulder, Olivia stepped outside for air. The Portland evening was cool and clear, with the kind of mountain views that made everything feel possible. "Olivia." She turned to find Camilla Rhodes standing a few feet away, looking uncertain and older than her 31 years. "Camilla, I didn't expect to see you here. Lauren's my cousin. I didn't know if I should come, but she said you'd probably be gracious about it and that maybe it was time for all of us to stop running from the past." They stood in awkward silence for a moment, two women connected by choices that had shaped all their lives in ways they were still understanding. "How are you?" Olivia asked finally. "Better. Different. I'm a teacher now, in Denver, elementary school. I love it." Camilla paused. "I think about what happened a lot, not with regret for the consequences. I deserved those, but with understanding about who I was then and who I've tried to become since. We all had to learn hard lessons, some harder than others." Camilla looked toward the reception where Daniel and Lauren were dancing to a song that spoke of new beginnings. "I'm glad he found someone who loves him the right way, and I'm glad you built something beautiful for yourself and Oliver." "How do you know what I built?" Camilla smiled sadly. "Because 7 years ago, you were the strongest person in that whole mess. And strong people don't just survive, they create something better from the ashes." As Olivia flew back to Chicago the next morning with Oliver sleeping beside her on the plane, she reflected on the strange circle of forgiveness and growth that had brought them all to this point. Daniel had learned to be a better man, even if it had cost him everything he thought he wanted. Camilla had learned the difference between love and destruction, even if it had taken years to rebuild her sense of self. And Olivia had learned that sometimes the greatest victory wasn't in punishing those who had wronged you, but in building a life so authentically yours that their actions became irrelevant to your happiness. Chicago welcomed them home with autumn sunshine and the promise of another school year for Oliver, another season of the life they had built together. As they drove through familiar neighborhoods toward the house that had witnessed betrayal and heartbreak and ultimately rebirth, Olivia felt the deep satisfaction of someone who had faced the worst and emerged not just intact, but transformed. "Mama," Oliver said from the back seat, "can we have pancakes for dinner? Wedding cake was good, but I missed your pancakes." "Of course we can," Olivia replied, smiling at the rearview mirror where she could see her son's hopeful face. "We can have whatever makes us happy." And as they pulled into the driveway of the home where Oliver would grow up surrounded by consistency and love, where Olivia had learned that being alone and being lonely were entirely different things, where a family of two had proven to be exactly as complete as any family needed to be, she knew that happiness, real, lasting happiness, was exactly what they had built together. The past had been survived, the present was being lived fully, and the future stretched ahead of them, bright with possibility and untainted by the lies that had once threatened to destroy everything worth keeping. In the end, love had won, not the desperate, clinging love that fears abandonment, but the fierce, protective love that chooses growth over stagnation, truth over comfort and hope over bitterness, every single day. What would you have done in Olivia's place? When you discovered the depth of betrayal, the calculated cruelty, the months of lies told to your face while carrying his child, would you have found the strength to choose dignity over revenge, wisdom over bitterness, building over destroying? In your darkest moment of betrayal, who would you choose to become? I hope you enjoyed today's video. If you did, please leave a like to help me out and don't forget to subscribe to the channel so you don't miss out on the next stories. Thanks for watching and see you in the next video.